On this week's episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast, Tyler and Jake join me to talk spoiling our kids and dogs, NFL news including Nautical troubles down in Miami, and Dynasty Strategy. So without further ado, what is up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast. I'm your fatherly host, Chu, here in the manhole, here to talk fatherhood, fantasy football, and everything in between. And with me today are my brothers in Dynasty, and unlike one of the Miami Dolphins receivers, they were invited to be here. Check these guys out on Twitter at tdaily11 and at Jacob_Ridgeway. Tyler and Jake, how are we doing? Tyler, hit me with it first.
Doing great. Had a good weekend. Rang in a friend's child's first birthday party yesterday. So good to get another kid's birthday party under the belt unscathed. Got out of there with minimal tears and had a good time. So how about you guys?
Smooth as ice, twice as nice. Never had a bad day in my life.
I mean, reigning champ Jake has just the zingers tonight. I'm telling you. Say, well, now it wasn't this weekend, but earlier last week, Marley and I, my wife, mostly Marley and I helped, saved a dog. So I'll go ahead and throw up a little overlay of the little gem here. She's got a little lady next to Finn. She is about like 6 months old. She was quite literally recovered from the side of the road. With her mom running away, apparently, and brought it back to the owner after like an hour of trying to figure that out. 30 minutes later, the owner, because they had Marley's number, then the owner just texted Marley and was just like, "Yeah, do you just want the younger one?" I was like, all right, so you like this is the puppy of the mom. So I'm like, so you kept this one, gave the other ones away, probably sold them, but you are just going to hand this one away. So I don't know if this one was trouble or what, but she's insanely sweet. And yeah, after pulling like 30 ticks off of her and taking her to the vet, giving her shots and that kind of thing. Yeah, ticks are like, they were like the size of my thumbnail. It was crazy. But yeah, she's doing better now, living the dream. Finn kind of antagonizing her and still getting used to Rex and Mookie. So we'll see how that process goes. It's better now than it was like a week ago, though, that's for sure.
Beats the hell out of 30 ticks, I think.
I believe so. Yeah, she barely moved on each of those ticks, which is pretty shocking because as you're plucking them off, like I had one, and this a little graphic for the first couple minutes of the show. I was taking one off, and I squeezed a bit too hard, and it blasted blood in my face. So it was like a horror movie.
He's got AIDS.
Yeah, you know how it goes out in the not quite Smith Mountain Lake area, the between of Roanoke and Smith Mountain Lake area. So it's entirely possible.
Proud of you, man. That's special.
Say Marley's got the sweet caring heart. I was grumbling, and I was like, she's pretty sweet. I think we have to do this. And yeah, thankfully she's doing well. So hopefully she can get along with the other two, and we'll keep her for the long haul. But say without further ado, let's jump into the first one here is the FF perspective. All right, fellas, I know you are familiar with this one. This is kind of covering some news, some of the more recent news, probably in the last week or so, on the football space and kind of how it relates to the fantasy space or dynasty space. And the first one here, I'll go ahead and switch all up here. So the first quote we've got, this is just a snippet of it. So Tyreek Hill and his group boarded a boat without permission. Boat employees told police that Hill said, quote, "I can buy you and the boat," close quote, and requote, "I'm number 10 with the Miami Dolphins," close quote. And that was according to the police telling Fox Sports 640. So, fellas, what are we thinking about this? I mean, there's not much ambiguity with threatening to use capitalism to buy the vessel that you're trespassing on, and pretty funny to note that there's no concern with them knowing who he is because he tells them his number. Tyler, thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is kind of a wild one. I mean, at first, it doesn't really look like there's much to it. I was doing a little bit of reading now over the weekend. It seems like there's two versions of this story, depending on who you're talking to. One in which, some women were denied access to a boat. Unclear on what their involvement with Tyreek Hill is. The other version I've heard is, and that was the source of the argument, the other version I've heard now is that Tyreek Hill and Drew Rosenhaus were doing some tarpon fishing like right off the dock. And most marinas, that I've been around, you can't really fish right off the dock there. And so that was the source of the argument. But throw all that aside, the best tidbit I've taken from this story, and with cell phone cameras, somebody has to have this footage out here. So I look forward to TMZ getting us access to it, is apparently Drew Rosenhaus jumped in the water to try to get a shark. And that was legitimately reported. I believe it was by Pro Football Talk, I think. So I need the footage of Drew Rosenhaus's probably drunk ass jumping in the water to try to tackle a shark.
Oh man. Say, Jake, thoughts on that?
Yeah. So Tyler, I did see that video. I saw it posted on Twitter, and Drew Rosenhaus, after being told not to jump in, jumped in and grabbed a 6-foot shark. I think it was a thresher shark or a sand shark. It was a 6-foot shark, at least, because it was bigger than he was, and he grabbed it at the back of its tail. And you could hear Tyreek Hill making a comment like, "Hell no, man, I ain't getting in that water," in the background. And there's clearly like a third party, whether it was on a boat or on a dock, that was saying, "Don't grab the shark, don't grab the shark." And it's kind of sickening, and I don't want to dampen the mood here because this is a bizarre situation. But I think basically they had, my uneducated understanding is they had caught a shark and tired it out to the point where it's completely exhausted. And so that's how he's able to grab the shark without the shark being aggressive or trying to get away itself. So the shark was completely hapless and helpless at the time. And so I think honestly, it's kind of disgusting. And I think Tyreek Hill, I mean, you can go just, hey, it's par for the course for this guy. But it sounds like the guy that he got physical with was 57 years old. And, it's one of those things where details are scarce. And next thing you know, like a video may or may not surface. You hope that it does. But, I'll go ahead and say he's actually somebody I've never had on my fantasy team. And I'm not trying to get on my mighty high horse here and say that I'm Mr. What's the word? Like Mr. Morals here. But I've just never been a fan of his, and I will continue not to be. And to me, this is just par for the course. You fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And that continues to be Tyreek Hill to his fullest extent.
Yeah, definitely having some troubles throughout his career. I think that messed up what would have been his first big payday with the Chiefs. Not that he didn't get, he didn't stay there for a bit, but I think it was maybe a little bit hampered from what his production would have indicated he should have earned. And yeah, that is also I had not heard that story, the one about the Rosenhaus trying to just jump on a shark. That is straight up bananas. So that seems more of I want to do this to tell the story.
Yeah, it makes a little bit more sense now, because I remember seeing, I think Tyreek Hill posted something about them, reeling in a fish for a super long time, and that it ended up being a shark. So I thought it was going to be a little bit funnier than that, but turns out leave it up to the agent to ruin it for us and make it awkward and not fun at all.
Well, I have not seen this video. It would maybe be slightly better if someone yelled "fins up" at some point in the video, but they did not do that. So we will instead jump over to the next one here.
I'm glad I'm sitting down for that one, Chew.
So the next one we've got. So Daniel Jones has already noticed how much of a mismatch Waller, speaking of Darren Waller, can be, and he hopes that the Jones-Waller duo becomes one of the league's best in 2023. And that was a quote from Greg Cassell, something that he had written. So, guys, thoughts on this? I really think since Waller went to New York, and certainly once the offseason camp stuff, you see the slow motion throws and catches, you see Waller smiling, Daniel Jones smiling, seemingly everyone's happy and ready for fantasy production. What are the thoughts on the upside, or the good thoughts on Daniel Jones and Darren Waller? Jake, what do you got?
Yeah, I hate to be negative Nancy here, Chew, but I think it's just I have concerns. You look at Darren Waller and you see a guy who had two really special seasons in 2019 and 2020, and he's had 78 receptions since then. And granted, you talk about like he's been riddled with injuries, and he's certainly a person in terms of who he is and how he's carried himself and the trials and tribulations that he's come through to be the player he is today is really special. I don't think that he's out of his prime per se. He's 30 years old, and tight end you see Travis Kelce, who's entering age 34, is the best tight end in the league. So I don't think he's out of his prime by no means for his position, but I just don't know that what we saw from Darren Waller those 2 years is actually who Darren Waller is as a player. And further, I'll read a stat to you for Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones in 2022 threw for 228 yards 3 times last season, including the playoffs. 2 of those times were against 2 of the 3 worst pass defenses in the league. So I just feel like the more Jenga blocks you start to stack, the more likely they are to fall. And I'm just not sure that 2 and 2 equals 4 here. I'm not sure that you're looking at and you talk about how, like, the wide receivers that are in the wide receiver room, or the pass catchers that are in the wide receiver room for the New York Giants right now. There are a ton of names, none of which are truly special. And you've got Sterling Shepard's coming back off of injury again this year. So that's another name that they brought in. That they have. So, I mean, there's probably a half dozen names on the Giants wide receiver core that you could like sit here and name. So I just wonder, where are those targets going? How often are they going to them? So could Darren Waller be special? Yes, but it's probably for a handful of games this year at best. And how are you to select those games? And is that really somebody you want to start on a week in and week out basis?
Say shout out Isaiah Hodgins on that one. Tyler or Ricky Falcone, thoughts on the DJ DW?
Yeah, I'm gonna, obviously everybody needs to take my take with a grain of salt because I have Darren Waller on my one and only Dynasty team's roster. So of course I'm going to put my rose-colored glasses on for this, but I'm going to zig where Jacob has zagged here and say it might not be. It's not going to be based in any statistical analysis, but when I look back at the 2 years that Jacob is referencing, where we got elite premium Darren Waller, I feel like the team was somewhat similarly constructed to what we're about to see in New York, in that it was devoid of an elite pass catcher. And so you had to have somebody like Darren Waller garner, without going back to look, I'm sure he was 100+ targets both of those seasons, easy, because he was Derek Carr's number one. And, you look at that stat from Daniel Jones that Jacob provided, 228 or 223, whatever it was, mid-20, 220s, not good. But I'm here looking at the top receivers last year. Saquon Barkley led him with 57 catches, tied with Richie James, then Darius Slayton. Those were the two only – Saquon Barkley and Richie James are the only 2 guys that caught more than 50 passes. Darius Slayton next with 46, Isaiah Hodgins with 33, Daniel Bellinger with 30. I mean, this team is just desperate for somebody who can come in and command targets. They have a glut of slot wide receivers, and they really need somebody who can line up on the perimeter. I'm not saying that's the most likely thing for Darren Waller, but it is somebody that they could move out and not just run as an inline tight end, somebody who's versatile, and they're looking for somebody to step up. And quick side note, I heard somebody mention it this week. I can't remember exactly who it was, but why is this team not after Nuke Hopkins? Maybe they are, and we just don't know, but like they're just desperately needing a bigger wide receiver, somebody who can go win balls on the outside, because we've seen Darius Slayton do it in, quick bursts, but I think we pretty much know at this point that that's not sustainable. So I think Darren Waller is probably set up best for success, better for success than he has been the last couple seasons.
True. If I may really quickly, I'm sorry to butt in, but we've got Jalen Hyatt, who they drafted this year, Jamison Crowder, Paris Campbell, Isaiah Hodgins, Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton. So 7 guys plus Darren Waller. I mean, those are. I mean, I don't discount anything that Tyler shared, because I think honestly I want it to happen, and I think it absolutely could happen. But where are these targets going, and how often are they going to them? Because these are all names that have had somewhat to legitimate success in the NFL. So I'm very intrigued by the Giants roster and how they're able to fill the cups of all of those players.
Who's getting cut off that list? I mean, that's a good, B- C+ group.
Sure.
I feel like it's yeah. I mean, with so many teams where they're either have their alpha and they're looking for their 2, or they have the 1, the 2, and they're looking for the steady 3. Steady 3, thinking about say like a Tyler Boyd out in Cincinnati, or the one where they're trying to find it in Philly. You have Quez Watkins, but he's maybe not the guy. It's funny that the Giants essentially have a lot of 2s, 3s, maybe more 3s. And thinking that Waller can become that guy. Looking back at two of his most targeted seasons, he had 117 targets in 2019 and 145 targets in 2020. Absolute bananas. And he actually had nine touchdowns in that 145 target season. But looking at this offense, compared to what they did last year, I know last year was really just trying to survive with the sheer number of wide receiver injuries. The amount of quarterback that Saquon Barkley and just touches he had to take. I don't know maybe if they're spoiled in thinking they didn't need to add tremendous talent all around that room and thinking they could just do at least as good as they did last year, if not better. And again, Darren Waller is a tremendous improvement, although Bellinger, stepped in adequately as a rookie, certainly. But I'm hoping for a Darren Waller that we knew 3-4 years ago. At least I think he's got to be a 80, 90 target guy. We'll just see what that turns into on that offense. But
let me just say real quick to close that up, I will take any of the wide receivers that the Giants cut off that list in Tennessee because God help them.
Tighten up, baby.
So we'll hitting our final quote here, and this is actually jumping over to the college ranks, but soon to be pro ranks after this upcoming season. So we're working ahead on some things for the summer, and let me tell you, the NFL is very high on USC quarterback Caleb Williams, and in an Andrew Luck, Trevor Lawrence kind of way, he is unbelievable. And that was according to a QB's coach, and that was per Albert Breer. So Tyler, thoughts on the very, very good feelings on Caleb Williams from one of these quarterback coaches in the NFL?
Yeah, I think the hype is warranted and is real there. I mean, we're talking about a guy who was number 1 or number 2 on every available recruiting website's rankings when he was a 5-star recruit, originally committed to Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma, and then obviously followed him to USC. We saw him, the success that he had winning the Heisman. I think he's probably, if you're not going to get excited for that guy, who are you going to get excited for? So I'm into the hype, and I've already made multiple attempts. It seems like it's too late at this point, probably, to trade up for those 1 or 2 top picks because you have Caleb Williams, then also another guy people are excited about, obviously not as much so, in Drake May at the top of next year's, likely at the top of next year's quarterback class. Things always shift during the season, but yeah, I think he, in my humble opinion, definitely fits that same vein as a Trevor Lawrence, Andrew Luck, all those guys that just, you look to build your franchise around.
Jake, in agreement on that one?
100%. Hard to argue in any fashion against Caleb Williams, for as special as he's been since he was at Oklahoma. I do want to share a couple of not nuggets, but names with you. So we've got number 1 overall picks the last 15 or so years in the NFL draft. Number 1 overall, not first rounders. These are quarterbacks: Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Jameis Winston, Andrew Luck, Cam Newton, Sam Bradford, Matthew Stafford, Jamarcus Russell, Alex Smith. So that's 15, 17 years right there. And you're looking at 10, 12 names. How many of those do you want to be your franchise quarterback? Or how many of those would you have taken to be your franchise quarterback at the number 1 overall pick, which is where we logically expect Caleb Williams to go, barring something astronomical or, some sort of horrific, awful injury that we won't even talk about here. So if he goes number 1 overall, I think, in my personal opinion, I would take half of those quarterbacks to be my franchise player to win me a Super Bowl in the National Football League. And so it's not to say you can't, the stats are the stats, and Caleb Williams is his own player, but I just think it's fascinating that you compare him to Andrew Luck, but also can you compare him to the other 10, 11 players that were drafted, quarterbacks that were drafted number 1 overall. And so you could say the stats are the stats, and that he has a 50% chance to be your dynasty quarterback or your franchise quarterback. And I think that is so fascinating to me because Caleb Williams is so special. I don't watch Pac-12 football, but I stayed up 2 or 3 times later than I care to talk about to watch Caleb Williams on the Pac-12 network or whatever godforsaken channel that he was on, because it was never national television. because he's so special and just changes the game so much. And I mean, it's not unfair to say that he reminds me a lot of Michael Vick in just the way that he can change the outcome of a particular play. I think that's the fair way to say it. But you just look, the stats are the stats, and you say, okay, should I really give up everything for him? If you believe in him, absolutely. But the stats tell you the last 15 years or so, he's got a 50% chance to truly be as special as I think we all are in agreement that he is.
Yeah, and it's pretty wild. Like you're saying, I feel like the term generational, it's tough when it seems like when you feel like you hear it more often. I think like when you think of like, in our, I guess, generation, you can say if you hear it a couple of times, you're then kind of thinking like, all right, well, how many of these guys can there possibly be? Is the thought that they're sincerely getting that much better, and they're better than the previous generational guy who was really only a couple years ago, or is the thought they're all on a similar tier, but really it depends on where they land, their weapons, their coaching, like that maybe helps determine like, do they make it generational or do they just become a perennial all-pro type
Great
thing?
point.
So, very curious to see which of the teams positions themselves very well to be drafting him. And then one I'd been hearing a little bit, with Kyler Murray coming back off of injury, who knows if they attempt to basically not tank the season necessarily, but some wild scenario of maybe Caleb Williams going there, and then maybe the Vikings get rid of Kirk Cousins, then they get Kyler Murray. It's a scenario I've heard once that I'm infatuated by because now I'm just imagining Kyler getting to go play with Justin Jefferson and Caleb Williams coming in, and then the Cardinals just revamping that whole team. But I'll leave that for another day. All right, fellas. Well,
you're just trying to relive your Josh Rosen, vicariously through Kyler Murray moving out of Arizona.
Let me just tell you, the beginning of my, I don't even think career is a nicer way to put it, dynasty career, drafting Josh Rosen, following it up, and let's see, it was Rosen, Flacco, and Stafford, I'm pretty sure, in that first draft, because I didn't know what Superflex meant, apparently. And then the following year, I'm pretty sure I drafted Dwayne Haskins, RIP. It's been rough. But I have Geno Smith, who I picked up. It was him and Locke off of last season, so he is the one shining light in terms of quarterbacks on the team in our league. So I'm going to go cry about it after the episode. I'm going to hold it in for now. But that was the FF perspective, and now we're going to talk a little Dynasty Strategy.
Strategy, all right?
Yeah! Okay, strategy session.
Talk strategy. Jealous?
All right, jumping over to Dynasty Strategy or Dynasty Strategery for those Will Ferrell fans. So a couple of things here. So we've got, this first one is actually also based on a quote that was something on Twitter that was just blowing up last week. This guy got reamed for saying it. Someone recently said Christian Watson has a higher ceiling than Justin Jefferson. That aside, regardless of whether you agree with that or not, it's a good sentence to kind of figure out, how do you define a fantasy floor and ceiling? What does that mean? I mean, I'm sure it's different for every position. Maybe, is it a one-word thing if they have to have this trade or that trade, or what do you really? How do you quantify those two terms there, Tyler?
Well, I can tell. I don't know who said it, but I can guarantee that we define ceiling a little bit differently. He and I.
The ceiling is the roof.
Exactly. No one could say it better than Michael Jordan himself. But I think, maybe I'm saying something that's painfully obvious, and so I apologize in advance if I am. But my ceiling definition is like I need to have seen it before, and that's my problem kind of with like this Christian Watson take, and we don't have to focus on that one in particular, but like I need to have seen it and in somewhat of a significant sample size. Now, we all know that Christian Watson had that tremendous stretch last season where I don't know if it was 3 or 4 weeks or 5 touchdowns over that span, and just chunk play after chunk play. So like you can make that argument that you've seen it, but to kind of parlay that into like what I look for in the floor is somebody like Christian Watson. How many ways can it go wrong? Like in the ceiling case, is it easy for it to go right, or is it easier for it to go wrong? And it's a lot easier to poke holes in players and talk yourself, I think, into floors than it is into ceilings. And you're more likely to be more successful if you're constantly pessimistic, I think, in this industry, or, in fantasy football in general. It's a lot easier to be right about players not working out than the vice versa. But what's their path to losing? How many holes can I poke in that boat? And then on the ceiling side of things, it's just I want to see some sustained success, whether it's, guys. The one thing that I would particularly like to look at, especially for like the wide receiver position, is snaps on the field and earning targets, because eventually those are indicators, I think, that stuff will break. But if a guy's not getting on the field and we just keep hearing about, hey, he's looking really good, but he still just hasn't quite broken the cusp and getting the majority of snaps or a bigger piece of the pie. Sorry, I'm getting a little off course there, but that's kind of my floor ceiling combo thought process.
Jake, thoughts on your fantasy floor and ceiling?
I thought Tyler. I thought it was a really authentic response from Tyler. I really don't have a lot to add there, because I think he quantified it really well. I just look at it in two terms. Like, what is you as a person, how do you define your risk meter? Because everybody's is different. And really, it's two words there at the top and bottom of that risk meter, and it's risk versus reward. And if you can answer that question authentically to yourself for fantasy football purposes, then I think you have your answer in what you're looking at. So it's very different. I think that everybody's ceiling versus floor, the way they look at it, is a lot different. It's like I heard it well said on a podcast recently, where the projections you have for your fantasy player is different than your rankings for fantasy players. And that, to me, says what's the difference there? It's ceiling versus floor in a lot of cases, risk versus reward.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think with a lot of these younger guys, if we have these metrics of saying, in their first year, if the receiver doesn't hit this number of yards, then I feel like I should just be out on him, because the likelihood of him becoming something maybe isn't it. If the running back, if they don't have this kind of build or this kind of 40 time or something like that, then that's just not going to happen. And I think really looking at, it's so many things that kind of play into that. You could have, in some weird scenario, two completely identical players. And if one goes to, if it's a wide receiver, one goes to high volume passing attack, like top 5 in targets, they could have a lower target share, but could still end up getting more targets than this other guy going to, say, a Falcons-esque offense and getting a higher target share, but it's not quite the same. So really, what they earn, like Tyler said, and it also ends up being, the efficiency in terms of, if they're, say, on a good offense, they're likely maybe not the only person, eating, so to speak, from that. So how efficient are they with the targets they do get? Where are they getting them? Are they valuable ones in terms of, is it a running back, able to generate some touchdowns? Is it a wide receiver? Are they just a Christian Watson or a Marquez Valdez-Scantling long ball guy? Is it someone who can work intermediate? So those guys that definitely develop those skills and don't just come in out of college, they are what they are, and they just kind of hope for the best. So
I think it's important to, like, in my humble opinion, for people to understand too, is the ceiling versus floor combo is something. It's a moving target, like most of this stuff is. Like, one thing I've tried to train my brain a little bit more as the years go by in fantasy is, in Dynasty specifically, is trying not to get too tied to guys in those particular situations, because we like to think that we are, the world's going to keep moving forward on this same course. We like to think that we can predict things 2-3 years out, but we're really bad at that. So when you take a guy like Drake London, who, he's in a kind of an offense that literally every signal is showing that they're going to try to run the piss out of the ball, and they're going to slow games down. It doesn't look very pass happy. It's like, think about how much that situation could change in a year to 24 months if Falcons trade up next season, sell the farm to go get Caleb Williams, and all of a sudden you've got Drake London tied to Caleb Williams. And so another player I thought of while you were talking to is, like, I was totally freaking out on Calvin Ridley 2 years ago when he was taking his mental health hiatus. Like, his floor could not have been lower to me. Like, I thought he was going to retire. And then, now you look at him and I feel completely opposite. Like, I want to be invested in him for the next 2 or 3 years. So the floor ceiling thing is something I feel like Dynasty players need to revisit pretty consistently.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I think, big thing in Dynasty, especially since Dynasty is the, versus redraft, you're left with this team on a year in, year out basis. If you're not learning, growing, and understanding how strategy changes, how the NFL changes, your team is simply going to be left in the dust. So jumping over to the next one here. So at what point in the offseason is it a good time to start building a lineup versus simply making trades surely based on value, just, getting those guys that are, you feel like at a certain time undervalued, getting rid of those guys that you feel are overvalued, and out kind of having a disregard for what your actual, starting lineup is going to look like. So at what point do you feel like you're addressing that, Jake?
Yeah, I think I'll probably start to assess next month in July. May is draft season, like NFL draft season. And then June is, there are mini camps, but it's kind of the doldrums of the National Football League in terms of fantasy. So I kind of take that time off and I try to reset and continue to read news and reports and what have you. But I think in July, you start to assess, okay, here's my baseline. Here's what I have as of today on my roster, and here's what I'm comfortable with in terms of not only my starters, but my top tier bench players. Like, who am I going? Because as we know in fantasy, and I don't think it's talked about enough, there are a lot of factors that come into play. You talk about weather, you talk about injuries, you talk about suspensions. I don't think that stuff is talked about a lot in off season of fantasy. And so I think to get back on track, you really should think about some of those items off season in July to try to factor in, okay, this is who I'm comfortable with starting. And if there is an issue, this is who I'm looking to bring in. And then I think you also start to look at, okay, these are players around the league that are on other rosters right now that I have an interest in, both that are more expensive to trade for and who are sort of like, I would say like somebody you are high on, maybe like Dwayne McBride prior to Dalvin Cook being let go. Maybe that's somebody you try to trade a third or fourth round future pick, rookie pick for. And so I think you just have to evaluate what is the important timeline to get back on track for you. And for me, it's July and August, because that's obviously when camp begins and you really start to hone in. Okay, this is when I should try to make either roster moves if your free agent pool is open, whether you have a budget for that or whether it's first come, first serve from a waiver priority perspective. And I think that July really allows you to take that month, because it's just a lot of like reports and kind of fluff to evaluate what you currently have on your roster, what else is around the league, and then you start to build from there into August and September.
I like it, Jake. Tyler, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like what Jake had to say there. I didn't really have that perspective, so it's interesting to get another line of thinking there. I definitely feel like my process is between the end of the Super Bowl and leading up to the rookie draft for me personally. That's usually either whether I'm in the playoffs or not. I start to look at towards the end of the season, like, where is the perception at on guys on my roster? And that's really important for me moving into the next season, because am I lower on a guy that his public perception is a little bit higher, or vice versa, and sort of make a short list at that point of who I want to move on from, and then positionally looking at those groups, parlaying that into what I need to address into the draft. And that's kind of my outline for how my off season goes. It's just like, what players am I going to move on from, or what players do I think I might want to acquire from somebody else? And then, so it's a little bit earlier than what Jacob's talking about, but I think also what the thing I do right before the season starts, we're starting to get those we get the camp nuggets, and then we see some preseason snaps and stuff like that. I start to build like a short list for the waiver wire. Much like, I don't know how many leagues run similarly to ours, but we keep off-season waivers on all the way up until 1 week prior to opening kick. So some guys that maybe aren't necessarily worth burning a waiver claim, one of your priority spots on, but somebody that I want to kind of keep tabs on, and again, look at their snap share or something early on in the season and see like, hey, Dwayne McBride's rotating in over Ty Chandler. Like, I need to dump Ty Chandler and go pick up another, third or second string running back that might be out there.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, seeing, two different viewpoints of, once we're past that Super Bowl, it really begins. People kind of, take count of what their roster looks like, how they feel about the roster. It could be people that overperformed or underperformed based on what they felt like was going to happen. And, even if it's ending last season feeling like I really have a huge deficiency at running back, and then theoretically you maybe make no moves, and then by the time you hit next season, somebody's back healthy, somebody, signed with a different team, it ends up looking tremendously different simply just based off of what happened in the NFL, not based on any actual trades dynasty-wise being done. So I think definitely, the offseason is a great time to harvest value wherever you can, especially if you have, like with those camp nuggets, if you have everybody or enough people in the league seeing those same camp nuggets and, they're changing who their favorite players are. If you kind of remain steadfast in who you feel like process-wise it makes sense to add and to trade and to get, then that's a sound way to, by the time you get into July and August, I think first week in August, I want to say is the first preseason game. If you're waiting till, say, the preseason itself to really round out an actual starting roster, it could be too late, with a lot of people probably having made some offseason moves and maybe kind of being set in what they feel like the roster is going to be. Likely if they are interested in somebody, they probably would have attempted to acquire them at some point between the Super Bowl and beginning of preseason. Jumping over to the final strategy question here. So we all have age thresholds for certain positions, and whether it's having a steadfast number or maybe a range to kind of monitor and see once they get up to that age, then maybe a number of snaps, that sort of thing. So say just picking one position, what is an age threshold that you have, and maybe who is a player that, whether they're on your roster or just someone that you generally like, that you're comfortable, I guess, is as being the exception. So Tyler, what do you got?
It's right around 31 for me, and wide receivers was immediately what popped into my head. Julio Jones, Des Bryant, AJ Green. It's usually guys that win on the outside, guys that are quote unquote, contested catch guys. It seems like that cliff is pretty severe. The obvious, I don't know what the age threshold is for running backs, but I feel like sometimes that descent can be a bit more gradual to where guys can still earn work. But a lot of these wide receivers, it's just like it seems like they're there one day and they're gone the next. They really don't get like a transition period or anything like that. So there are, I couldn't think of an exception on a comparable wide receiver, but I will say a style that I think seems to hold up a little bit better, like the guys that run short to intermediate routes, your slot guys, somebody like Adam Thielen. Maybe I'm not saying that he's going to end up being, a wide receiver 1 or maybe not even a wide receiver 2 this year, but somebody I would much rather have is he 33 now? A 33-year-old Adam Thielen than I would like a 31-year-old turn the clock back like Vincent Jackson or something like that, because those guys, it gets tougher and tougher for them to win as they're facing these younger, just snappier, speedier corners every single year.
I like that. And yeah, I think, one person I had, at least in a wide receiver sake, and I'm with you on that general age, whether it be 30, 31, Keenan Allen, somebody he's a shade over 31 now, coming off of injury, but now he's going to be, again, still as Justin Herbert. Quentin Johnston's probably more of a threat to Mike Williams than he is Keenan Allen. And if you have Kellen Moore coming over, and he's going to just air the hell out of the ball if they weren't already doing a pretty good job of that. So some of those guys, they can maybe elongate their career a little bit more as a target-heavy guys. But say, Jake, what do you got as an age threshold?
Yeah, I think it's 27 for running backs is what I think I lean on. And you look at, these are pivotal years for Christian McCaffrey. This is his age 27 season. For Nick Chubb, I consider this to be his age 28 season. He turns 28, I think, in November. And then for Derrick Henry, I think he turns 30 this year. And I think those are sort of also exceptions because they can be so special, and they have been. And there's not much that they can't do at this point. They've showcased, and so I'm going to continue to believe in them until they give me reason to doubt them. But then you turn the page and you see names like Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt, Ezekiel Elliott, who have been also really special players in their own right at some point in time the last 5 or 6 seasons. And these guys are also in their age 28 or 29 seasons, 28 for Kareem Hunt and Zeke Elliott, and then 28 or 29, depending on how you personally look at birthdays for Leonard Fournette. I think his birthday's in early January when the season sort of comes to an end there. But I just think it's so fascinating for running backs. There's a stat out there, and I'm not even going to try to to say it because I'm going to butcher it and be completely wrong, but I think it has to do with NFL rushing leaders. And there's like one who's led the NFL in rushing in the modern NFL era. Well, I shouldn't say that, but at least in the last 25 years, they've really been playing fantasy football. Is that I think it's LaShawn McCoy is the only one who's done that after age 26, 27. So it just becomes a lot harder at that point in that threshold for guys to be able to be special players that you can count on week in and week out. So again, those are three exceptions, and Christian McCaffrey, Chubb, and Henry. And I think the last point I want to make there, Chu, is I sort of ramble here to make a long story long, if you will, is that, there seem to be more exceptions to the rule the more we play fantasy football. And I think that's reminding me that maybe I should continue to buy into health, to medicine, to the dual RB approach, where a lot of teams are using multiple backs these days. And the more that I can sort of just trust in what I've seen, to Tyler's point earlier in the podcast, that I should continue to have faith until I'm shown or proven otherwise. And so Derrick Henry, I would absolutely take him in the second round in a redraft league, and be more than happy to do it until he shows me otherwise. Because every year I keep counting the guy out, and every year he proves me wrong.
Yeah, running back is the interesting one. I feel like, for any of us that play Dynasty now, I'm sure likely it started with redraft, and I'm sure you're still in redraft leagues now. And any of those guys that you're maybe Derrick Henry is probably the best example, a bit leery on for Dynasty, you feel more than comfortable snagging him in redraft, because any of that, the heartache and anything of, all right, well, but after this season, how is he going to do? You don't worry about that. But for Dynasty's sake, you certainly do have to worry about that. But I think guys like that, a guy I had on there for that age was CMC, him being 27 all season long, finishing as the RB2, finally, kind of returning to form and escaping the horrific rule of Matt Rule, going over to San Fran, and just an absolute revolving door of running backs there. The thought was always they're going to abuse running backs. It's going to be Matt Breida. It's going to be Jermichael Hasty. It's going to be Salvon Ahmed at some point, I'm pretty sure. It's going to be Elijah Mitchell. But it's Christian McCaffrey. Even if he's being spelled by, the Elijah Mitchell and the Jordan Mason and all these guys, it's still Christian McCaffrey. And him being traded, he was traded week 7 and also played that week, I believe it was against the Chiefs. But after that, let's see, so it was 10 more games that he played for San Fran specifically. He had 8 top 12 finishes, and of those 8, 5 were top 5. Oh. And this is a guy who he's entering a backfield where he's not getting the volume that he got when he was the RB1 in Carolina years ago. But he doesn't need that. He has tremendous efficiency, both on the ground and through the air. And certainly, in a profile like that, in an offense like that, you can spell him with Elijah Mitchell and Jordan Mason all you want. I have the utmost faith in someone like that. And Derrick Henry is just a freak of nature. He's someone who we're just trusting to run until the wheels sincerely fall off. And I hope that is not for a number of years. And just to shout out, there's an article on Apex Fantasy Leagues, something talking about kind of the age Apex and really looking at a statistical view of what is peak production, when does that peak, and when does that kind of drop off for each position. And yeah, when you're looking at running backs, it's like 24 to 26. For wide receivers, it kind of maybe 27 to 29, probably a little younger than that. But it's interesting, like you said, Jake, we do see a lot of these guys that are the exception, but it does kind of feel like we're getting more exceptions to this rule as we go deeper and deeper into our dynasty seasons.
And Chu, really quickly, and I think you were sort of alluding to this. It's like, are you willing to risk being a year too late on getting out on a player than a year too early? And my personal opinion is that if you're going to play dynasty football, and unless you are not competing, I would 100% rather be a year too late on a player each and every time. Mm. And in case in point, you could say Calvin Ridley, you could say Ezekiel Elliott for completely different reasons. But Ezekiel Elliott is still on my roster, and I'm very curious to see where he lands, what the position landscape looks like. And I know you can talk about how he's lost a step. That's fine. But I would rather wait and see and have him prove me wrong and be too late because he's been a very special player for a very long time. I'd rather believe in him until, as Tyler has pointed out multiple times in this episode, until I've seen otherwise.
Yeah, I think I agree. I'd rather be caught holding the bag, so to speak, as on some of these guys. Like another one that I was top of mind, especially just because Jacob and I swapped these players a couple seasons ago. But Aaron Jones, we did that Zeke deal straight up, and I think his career could go obviously a multitude of different ways, but I think it looks like it could be in for potentially a really steep cliff if things shake out, whether it be an injury or just the way that this offense goes with Jordan Love under center. Maybe they're a little bit more power run than they were, spreading it out with Aaron Rodgers under center. So I admittedly I did try to move Aaron Jones just to see what the market was looking like, but I'm still not going to give somebody like that away for nothing. And that, in those situations, I'm just going to hang on to him because I'm not going to dump them for pennies on the dollar when they're still that talented and you haven't seen it completely fall off yet.
Yep.
And that's honestly a great point. When you have someone who it's like, hey, they just finished, top 10, top 15 in their position, but they're older, and just the perception is, oh, well, I'm going to pay a full round less of a pick than I would have paid for if he was, say, 2 or 3 years younger. It should and it shouldn't matter. But also, like you're saying, Tyler, like if you test the market and people are just going to pay based on the age and not based on the production, it's like I have no reason to get rid of this guy. Like by the time I would trade him for what you're asking me for, he's going to be done. So it's not going to really even matter at that point. And you're not going to, whatever you're going to get in value for that lesser pick than you feel like you probably deserve. What are you probably going to get out of that is probably not matching production for production. So. Well, fellas, I meant to start the episode with this question, but I guess I'll go ahead and end it with this one, talking about our dogs and our kids. So what is one of the latest examples of spoiling either dogs or kids? Either way, they both can be spoiled, and it happens all the time. Jake, what do you got for the spoiling?
So my dog is Katie and I's child, and I think that in terms of how she's spoiled, and I think very, very bluntly, I think that she sleeps with us. We occasionally will feed her human food items. And I think more importantly, and she also gets walked every day. I don't get a walk every day. Thanks, Katie. But I think if I'm just going to leave it to one line, it's that, for Katie and I don't drink coffee as much, but I do occasionally. But in our Nespresso machine, we use tap water. And for the dog is 2.5 years old, and she's never had a drop of tap water in this house. And will continue not to have a drop of tap water in this house for as long as she's here. So if that doesn't tell you how spoiled that a dog is, I don't know what would.
Jake, you don't feed her that poison, all right? Yeah, that's one interesting thing growing up. Honestly, even my wife's a little bit that way of like, oh, you drink tap water? I'm like, yeah, we never had a filter in my house. I was like, what do you think they put in the water? But anyway, we're not Flint, Michigan.
Not anyway, everybody is as blessed as we are to grow up in Roanoke, Virginia, too.
I hear that so many times.
With the fine municipal water that we enjoyed.
And the upstanding school system. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. For me, I'll also focus in on the dog for a quick minute because we could get a really long list of how we spoil our human child. But recently, we've kind of been in between dog groomers here for reasons I won't get into. But we just had this is going to make me sound so bougie. We just had an in-home groomer come to our house and basically give Millie a spa day here at the house. Now, if I could have somebody show up to cut my hair and give me a bath and, just give me the full, pampered treatment, that would
cut your nails, brush your teeth.
That'd be quite nice. It would probably cost a lot more than, $100 or so bucks too. Cause hey, but yeah, I think that's probably the best example.
I will say though, and I think that might be becoming more common. there was basically a Dumb and Dumber-esque van, except backwards because they had the face of the puppy on the back of this van. And it was molded onto the van. Like it was not painted. It was molded like a puppy's face, like in Dumb and Dumber. And it was a mobile dog grooming service. And I don't know what that looks like exactly. I don't. Finn even asked. He was like, "What is that?" I was like, "That is a mobile dog grooming service, but it's a pretty nice one, and they're in a pretty solid area of Roanoke. So I'm thinking this might be a pretty hot business." I'll say if I can throw in a human pampering, or human spoiling, I guess. So my mother-in-law got Finn like those candy dispensers, not like the one that you would see at like a store where they have that restrictor plate where you can only turn it like, a quarter or a half. This one is a football, which would hold the candy, and we decided to put Skittles in there because why not? And this does not have that restrictor plate on it. So theoretically, if you just open it, it will remain open. It doesn't spring back closed. And we found that out when we filled it to the brim with Skittles. And Finn proceeded, because we let him do it, because why not let a 4-year-old do that? He, hit it down, and then it proceeded to just fountain out Skittles, much like a commercial. So now I understand the appeal of those commercials. So now we have to let him do it. When he goes to let it down, quickly slap the thing back up, because if we don't do that, there's going to be about a pound of Skittles on the floor. And he only earns them, of course, if he's had a good day, eats his dinner, doesn't complain, which is pretty tough to do all of those things in one day. But yeah, so tough life. Well, fellas, that can be the final word, unless you guys had a shout out or anything that you maybe wanted to throw out there.
Good here.
I have a quick question that my final thought is a question for the two of you. And for Chu, I think it qualifies for both, even though Jacob doesn't have a child of his own yet. But I know that he's taken care of plenty of little ones, including my own. Which is worse, the sound of your dog throwing up in the middle of the night? And we all know that.
It's okay.
Get off the rug. Get off the rug.
Or picking up a baby and immediately feeling poo on the undercarriage when you put the hand under the hiney. Jake, start us off.
I think it's the dog, because the baby you feel like you can address. Like I've changed I've changed a few diapers. It's something. It's a human. This is what they do. You deal with it. You just hope that they're not screaming and crying all the while. I don't know. There's something about it's just like, okay, this is part of caring for a child because we did it. They're going to do it. It's going to continue to be done. But for a dog, they don't ever have the ability to talk or tell you what's wrong. And so it strikes the fear of God in me. And I'm sure it would with a child, God willing, I ever have one. But when the dog is in your bed in the middle of the night and you wake up, you hear it, that, and as Tyler so eloquently, like his rendition of it, you try to get the dog, okay, let's get her on the carpet or get a towel as quickly as we possibly can to mitigate the damage here. But then you're awake all night. What's wrong with the dog? How do we deal with this? Is there anything wrong with the dog? Was it something she ate? And with a baby, if in that particular example, you think, okay, we probably don't have a stomach bug, you hope. Otherwise, it's bombs away for, it's probably going to ruin the rest of your entire day, not just, a sleep. But I think it would be the dog. And it's just something about it being a dog's vomit and the way that smells is just slightly different than a human's. Granted, I know that I can't speak to it specifically because I don't currently have a child. So I'm willing to admit that my perspective is a bit jaded and probably not accurate.
No, Jake, I definitely understand. That's one thing in dealing with, my son. I think I've explained this in detail in a much earlier episode when my son painted shit on the wall.
Scatolia, isn't that what we call that?
Scatolia. It is in fact a thing, and it didn't help that it's a textured wall. So then I essentially had to sand down the wall with a Brillo pad.
One day, one of us is going to be on Jeopardy and is going to get a Scatolia question right because of this freaking podcast.
That's right. That's going to be the Daily Double. That's for sure. I think that's kind of desensitized me to that, and obviously changing just regular diapers, but the whole general like kids pee and poop. Yeah. Obviously cleaned up his pee off of his carpet too. But the dog one, I definitely understand that, and it's likely going to be in the middle of the night. You hear the sound, so you have a couple of seconds to kind of contain yourself and then realize this is what's happening. I can't see right now because I haven't grabbed my phone and turned the flashlight on, but I'm hoping it's not directly on me or it's the dog that's on the floor where, just try and kick him and scoot him over to the hardwood part instead of the rug or the carpet. But it's definitely not what you want to deal with when you're attempting to sleep, because likely, whether it be having a kid or a fur baby, you probably need all the sleep you possibly can get to deal with their nonsense in the morning. So dealing with dog vomit in the middle of the night does not help the sleep process. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm very interested because I'm in the minority here. I would rather deal with the dog throw up than I would with the. My wife can attest to you both offline at some point that she's been very frustrated with me at times, a couple of times, because there's been some messy diapers that have caused me to dry heave and need to recuse myself. So there's just something about it that doesn't work for me. So yeah, it's good to get some other perspective though. It was fun hearing that.
I say, are you like Rafi? Does it trigger a gag reflex for you?
Yeah. And I have, much to my wife's chagrin, I avoided getting defecated on, knock on wood. Now that our daughter's getting closer and closer to potty training, nice. As the days and months go by, it doesn't maybe look like it is in the cards with this one. So maybe baby number 2 will get me back. But yeah, I just even being in the presence of that loaded basket of joy is just, it's a little much for me.
That is quite the analogy, Tyler. I give you credit there. That's incredible. I got to tell you all a quick story. So there's a family member I have that will not be named here. We were actually moving a piece of furniture for an elderly person, and the elderly person had shit their pants. And my family member, who will not be named here, actually, upon discovering that and all the sensations that come with that, both physically, emotionally, philosophically, all of the above, took off running out of the house faster than I've ever seen them move in their entire life, dry heaving because they couldn't take the smell, the texture, all of the above. Yeah, and so I think, to your point, Tyler, I don't think that maybe you're not in the minority. I think it is definitely not for the fan of heart. It's a little different when it's an elderly person. But, what I guess what I'm saying here is I don't think you're alone.
All right, good to know.
I say, well, whether it's shit or whether it's puke, we have to put up with it, or we have to run out of the house. So either way it gets handled, right?
That's right.
So,
we're all men here.
Well, fellas, I appreciate you coming on, and yeah, we'll have to be doing this again real soon. But y'all have a good one.
Thanks, Chip.